Everyone chiming in. Now let's finally get into this one. Anthony, let's start off by talking about spring training as a whole. Before we get into each of these key topics, I just want to know, what is your excitement level heading into spring now, and what is your biggest takeaway from, of course, seeing those little highlight clips of literally every player warming up every single day, fans overreacting to swings as guys are quite literally just getting warmed up or whatever it may be. What's your biggest takeaway from the start of spring here?
I'm always excited and a eternal optimist as soon as it gets to spring training. I love this time of year. I love seeing all the clips, and I'm retweeting everyone's at bat and everyone's pitch. Mania striking out Pete Alonzo today, and Francisco Lindor broken bat hits. All the fun stuff that comes with spring training. The captain is in town, David Wright. So it's just nice to see all the interaction between the players and also the players with the fans, because once the regular season comes, you really don't get that interaction between players and fans. Yes, they'll go and sign a couple autographs here and there, but it's at spring training where you really get to see, fans up close and personal with the players. So that's always a joy. I'm pretty sure for a lot of the kids and a lot of the fans of the Mets and every baseball team. But, spring training is just a time where fans should be, optimistic. I know it's not what we wanted in the offseason, but, the way that this team has come together, the pitching staff, the bullpen, it may not be the team that you think that's going to win the division, but there's a chance that they could make the postseason and get in there as a wild card. So I'm always going to be optimistic for something like that.
Right. As will I. And there's a lot of cautious optimism with this Mets team heading into this season. I feel like we say that a lot as Mets fans, unfortunately, but we are finding ourselves in that regard once again. And now as we head into spring training, we do have some new guys on the block. And I spoke recently, a couple days ago, truthfully had no clue that the video would get nearly as much traction as it did, talking about Ji-Man Choi and Ben Gamel. Yeah, here we are. So Ji-Man Choi, of course, signed a deal with the Mets, a split contract a couple days ago, which means that if he cracks the majors and makes the opening day roster, then he'll have a $3.5 million salary. Or if he stays in the minor leagues with the Mets, he'll make $35,000 per year, not per year rather, but per month while being there in AAA. But now the Mets also signed Luke Voit, again, another DH first base type, plenty more power usually versus someone like Ji-Man Choi, even though Choi is no slouch with that exit velo. He's one of the best hitters in actually Major League Baseball in that regard. He's very good in that regard. So there's a lot of interesting takeaways with having these guys signing, again, these minor league deals, essentially these split contracts, just seeing what you have with them in spring training. If they look well enough to crack the roster, then okay. This is competition a little bit for Mark Vientos at the DH position. DJ Stewart, again, a lot of guys are going to be competing for spots. So what is your biggest takeaway with the Mets continuing to add depth here and the likes of Ji-Man Choi, a guy that can certainly handle his own at first base without a problem if you want to get Pete Alonzo an off day there at DH, and of course Luke Voit, who to a lesser degree, again, is that prototypical DH bat, but has just struggled to find consistency with that power and contact at the MLB level.
Before I answer that question, is Luke Voit also on a split contract? I don't know if I know you said Ji-Man Choi, but
I think he's on a minor league contract with the invite to spring training.
Depth is always good, right? We know this. Depth is always good, and it's needed. It's not the flashy names, right? Everyone wanted JD Martinez. Everyone wanted Justin Turner, and the Mets weren't going to pay those guys that amount. I mean, JD Martinez is still out there, could fall, but I doubt that he comes to the Mets, especially with them wanting to see what they can get out of Mark Vientos and, the DJ Stewarts and Brett Beatties of the world. Bringing these guys in, it's not the wrong thing to do. You need this kind of depth. And if Mark Vientos does not work out at DH, you have a guy like Luke Voit. If DJ Stewart, who also, I think he has an option to be sent to the minors. So that's something that we should be looking into as well with DJ Stewart, that he might not start the season with the Mets if they decide to go with a Ji-Man Choi or Luke Voit. Interesting enough, Luke Voit, in 2020, in that 60-game season, I think he played maybe like 50, 58 games, had like 26, 27 home runs. I mean, the guy's got power, and so does Ji-Man Choi. So, you can't go wrong with getting these kind of depth guys. And we've seen in the past with David Stearns how some of these kind of small moves, especially in the bullpen, they tend to work out. And these are moves that in the past have not worked out with the Mets. Every time there's been an injury, we have never had the proper depth to replace those players, even just to fill in for a little time. So if they can fill that role, I think that the Mets have done well here, and only time will tell, but you can't go wrong with these kind of deals.
No, you can't, because again, there's little to no risk involved, right? And it's always good to have depth. That has been the entire motto. That has been the entire story of the Mets and David Stearns as his first offseason as president of baseball operations. And don't get me wrong, we of course would have liked to see some more flashiness at times, but there were right for arguments for a lot of the players that the Mets ended up not landing. Others stun a little bit. Again, I think we all would have loved like a Jorge Soler on that AAV on a 3-year deal, for example. But aside from those examples, there really isn't too much out there. And when looking at Voit and Choi in particular, the final remarks to share on them is, again, Choi is such an interesting hitter because he's similar to Daniel Vogelbach in the sense where if you look at his peripherals, especially over the past couple of years throughout his career, a lot of some of them are pretty good. I mean, you would think that this guy is one of the best hitters in Major League Baseball when you're looking at them. And then you're like, he had a 65 WRC plus last year. Like, what happened there? Obviously, he dealt with a lot of ailments with the San Diego Padres this past season. Ji-Man Choi had him out for quite a bit because of that reason. And at his absolute best is a guy that draws plenty when it comes to walks, gets on base at a good clip, has a phenomenal eye and command of the strike zone. And the big thing that separates him from Daniel Vogelbach is that he doesn't only have the eye, but he has the exit velo, he has the power, and he actually has been consistently barreling. Sweet spot percentage throughout his career, he's usually been pretty good, one of the better ones in baseball. Last year was a little below average, but he had such a small sample size that I really don't want to buy into that much. Ji-Man Choi is pretty much a league average to a little bit of over a league average hitter when he's right. Similar to Ben Gamel's around a league average hitter. Luke Voit is certainly a below league average hitter. The guy, again, struggles hit for contact quite a bit. He's a big boomer bust guy, we know that, and certainly not one that I want to see getting consistent reps over like Mark Vientos. But the point in assigning like Luke Voit especially is if, say, Mark Vientos does go down with injury, if, say, there's inconsistencies, you know that you have that cushion there in Syracuse, and clearly Luke knows that he has a shot, of course, to try to crack the roster out of camp, but he also has a comfortability with Syracuse from last season when he was with the organization. So there's familiarity there, and I'm sure that went in hand with why he decided to return versus going to the place that maybe gives him the best opportunity to crack a roster spot, because it is most certainly not the Mets. I can tell you that much right now with the kind of depth that they currently have. So that's what you need to know there about Luke Voit and Ji-Man Choi, the latest pickups for the Metropolitans. Again, I appreciate everyone chiming in, guys. Thank you all so much for being in here. Smash that like and subscribe button. It really does me a lot. Worse than Cohen in the booth. Oh my goodness, Lord. Imagine criticizing Gary Cohen in the booth to begin with. This is what we have to deal with, Anthony. I mean, welcome to Mets fandom here on YouTube. It baffles me, but again, everyone's entitled to their opinion. That's fine. I will always love Gary, Keith, and Ron and the great work that they do. But now let's talk about the story that took over social media today. I was debating on doing a video about it, but I'm like, it got shot down so quick. It was like, there really isn't point. Let's talk about it in the live show, because there is plenty to break down here, and that is the Alvarez extension rumors. Now, Anthony, we saw earlier today Hector Gomez, who we have cited plenty on the channel. Unfortunately, Hector has been right very little that I've referenced on the channel versus being right. And even though that he has had the upper hand with Dominican players, Puerto Rican players, Caribbean players as a whole, because that's, his demographic, that's the market that he's really working in, he posted earlier today, breaking news: the Mets are close to extending Francisco Alvarez, their young catcher. Now, for those that don't know, Francisco Alvarez made it known entering the offseason that he's publicly willing and open to an extension. He would like to be long-term with the Mets if the Mets align with their front office and David Stearns and they reach an agreement. We heard from Andy Martino as well today after shooting down essentially that there are no active talks from what he's heard. However, he does know that the Mets are very much open and willing to this idea. David Stearns has shown no willingness to extend young talent, especially internal talent, during his time in Milwaukee, and of course to a lesser extent as assistant GM there with the Houston Astros. So he has that familiarity, which is great. And Alvarez, I mean, if there's anyone that's deserving, I don't get me wrong, we all know Pete Alonzo deserves to hopefully be a Met his entire career, but if you want to go about the Atlanta Braves philosophy and way, it is most certainly by making sure you extend someone like Francisco Alvarez. If you can lock him down on a 5 to 10 year extension, that easily can have yourself stress-free when evaluating the backstop position for hopefully the entirety of that time. Now, Francisco Alvarez was asked by the media today and stated himself what the current status of this is, and it is the following, and I quote, my agent hasn't told me anything, so I'm assuming that they haven't had any type of conversations. They haven't approached me with any types of conversations, so as of right now, there is nothing. So, of course, anything can change. Is it possible that Hector heard something that was fairly reliable and, there is something brewing, but just not there yet? That is possible, because we all know that Andy Martino, while he has been accurate plenty with his reporting, he also has found himself in times throughout the offseason where he doesn't have the scoop at all. And when he doesn't have the scoop, he just doesn't like to acknowledge it, or of course he's going to shoot it down right away until he finds out himself that this can too be confirmed. But Alvarez, it doesn't look like he's going to be extended at this point in time, but it leaves a great question. Should the Mets extend Francisco Alvarez? I've been a heavy proponent of that since the rumblings have started earlier this offseason. Anthony, I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this.
Yeah, I would like to see Alvarez extended, just not this year. I need to see a little bit more. You can always account a sophomore slump happening this season. You never know. But I need to see at least one more year out of him. I think going the same route they did with Jose Reyes and David Wright before they kind of gave them their extensions would do wonders in that kind of way. But I would not give him an extension this year. It would kind of bother me if I was Pete Alonzo, with all that Pete Alonzo has done for this team and the consistent player he's been, power hitter, RBI, run producer. It would kind of bother me if they didn't give him an extension and they would then go to Francisco Alvarez because, he would be a little bit cheaper and, be kind of locking up one of their younger guys. So I would wait, see where everything goes with Pete Alonzo and next year's free agency, which is huge. Right. You mentioned it today. I was watching you on Bleacher Report with the top 10 free agents. So, that's something that the Mets need to look into too. And they will give him an extension. It's just, I don't think it's going to be this year. And we talked about it. I'm pretty sure you made a video. I definitely made a video when he made the initial comments that he wanted to do an extension. And still my same thoughts, not this year, maybe next year or the year after.
Okay. Understood. I personally think it's going to happen at some point this year. I think that there is certainly some, I really do think so. I don't think it's going to happen right now, just from what we're currently hearing. Like, obviously, if the reporting changes, then I'm going to go with the reporting and hope that it's true and genuine. Even though I will say it sucks that I feel like I can't entrust it nearly as much as I feel like I could even a couple of years ago, because of how contradictive it feels like people are every single offseason nowadays. But point still stands. I do think Alvarez will be extended, but it will probably happen mid-season at absolute earliest, because we know that David Stearns wants to see what he has in Alvarez. But all it takes is like a typical Francisco Alvarez performance in the first half. In my opinion, that's going to warrant those discussions. And the reason why I say that is Francisco Alvarez is not only a unique talent, but he's almost an anomaly of a catcher, especially at his age. At the age of 22, to not only have the offensive upside where he can easily be the best power hitter among all catchers in Major League Baseball for the next decade, as long as he stays healthy and, again, doesn't fall off a complete cliff for whatever reason. That potential's there. The defense, which has caught everyone off guard, including myself, in the best way possible, from a guy that we didn't think that maybe he's going to project best, maybe just as a standalone DH a couple years into the league, to now he's one of the best defenders in Major League Baseball already statistically, framing-wise, pop time. I mean, his ability to get to second so quick with that absolute cannon of an arm. I mean, what is there not to love about Francisco Alvarez? And of course, you're going to have the fans saying he still has a very small sample size. He strikes out at a great clip still. He needs to work on his command with the zone. All those things are true and good, and those things will be worked on. But I think in the case of Alvarez, knowing that he wants to be here is something that the Mets cannot take for granted, in my opinion, because if you do extend him to a long-term deal and say it doesn't pan out, you're already extending him at a much lower market value, potentially, what, say he would be at a couple years from now. And then if he falls off a cliff not long after that, then it might have not been your problem if you let him walk, but then you take that risk. So for the Mets, there's incentive to finally start to lock down your homegrown talent now that you have something that you're properly developing these guys, something the Mets have struggled so much with the past decade. They're drafting to guys cracking the bigs ratio has been a bottom feeder in Major League Baseball. That's why they brought in Chris Gross from the Houston Astros to help in that regard, for example. Yep. But to have Alvarez here, I think it's vital, absolutely vital to, at minimum, see how things are looking as we get into the season and ultimately have those discussions, because those contracts can do wonders for this Mets team. It has done wonders for so many others, and not that they're going to be worrying about penny pinching, but the ability to lock down a potential franchise catcher for this organization below standard market value, what could be the case for a good portion of his career, I think that's just too hard to pass up if you're the Mets here. So I'm curious to see how this is going to play out for the remainder of spring, assuming that it does heading into the season. I understand the rightful arguments that people say, hey, I want to wait at least a year or two. That's completely fine. I'm just saying I will not be surprised if extension talks and actually do happen this year, and this is the reasons as to why. I'm perfectly fine either way if it doesn't happen for a year or two from now, as long as it does happen, because Alvarez is a talent that I think is worthwhile in this organization. So any final remarks on Alvarez that you'd like to share before we get on to our next topic?
Yeah, I wouldn't be upset if they did do it. My preference is to wait the year, but I understand, like, everything that you brought up, makes sense for the reasons to do it. And as talented as he is, power wise and offensively, I think I was more impressed the way he called games, the way he played defensively. And like you said, that's something that cannot be denied. And, if they give him the extension, that'd be great. And doing that, I guess, the Braves way of signing their homegrown talent. And the Mets have not really, done well with, signing their own homegrown guys. It's few and far between that they've done it for. Like I mentioned, Reyes and Wright. Obviously, they did it for McNeil and Nimmo, but some of the bigger bats that had successful careers, they kind of just let slip through and go to free agency. So, you know what? If they give it to him, more power to him. And as we know, catcher's shelf life is not really that long as the rest of the players in the league, because their knees and having to sit down the whole time. They're kind of like the running backs of baseball.
They're the running backs of baseball if, depending on their body of work, right? But in the case of Alvarez, for him to be at the bigs already at 22, like, just think about it. A decade from now, he could be the best catcher in baseball still. Hopefully. He isn't right now. I'm aware of that. I'm not getting ahead of myself. He did have a stretch last season where he was the best catcher in baseball. That was absolutely true. For around 2 to 3 month stretch, he was absolutely phenomenal for the Mets. And final thing I will say about this too, because this is actually a fair comment. Lord Rage says this: why would anyone extend a player after 1 year? It's stupid. It shouldn't happen. Illogical. I'm pretty sure the Arizona Diamondbacks feel pretty good about Corbin Carroll right about now. So
didn't Milwaukee do it? Milwaukee just did it with one of their players, and he hasn't stepped foot in the majors yet.
Correct. So yes, there's risk involved, but I'm saying there's exceptions when you're dealing with like elite young talents, and they're especially in a premier position. And Alvarez is that. Carroll, we just saw what he did this past season. He's a human highlight reel. Absolutely love the guy. And that's a brilliant contract that they have him locked in for, So that is already better than what the market value is. You know what I mean? And for those that are curious too, and this is the final thing I'll say about player worth, if you guys are interested in these types of things, if you go through Fangraphs, look up players, and you can go down when you look up player information all the way down the bottom there, you'll see a tab, and it shows you roughly right around what their worth was as a player each season. So Pete Alonso, for example, when he's making his arguments on what should my AAV be like, it goes in hand with the worth that you see from WAR, of course, and all these other factors that come into play. And whether you guys like it or not, I'm just telling you that is something that certainly comes into play. And if you're interested in that type of thing, I highly implore you all to look it up. So now let's talk. We talked about Francisco Alvarez. Now let's get into Batty and Vientos. Now, Brett Batty and Mark Vientos are two guys that we know have a lot of uncertainty heading into the season, in the sense that these are two guys that are quad A players. They have absolutely raked at the AAA level, and at the MLB level, they've struggled to find consistency. And the likes of Brett Batty, he had the third base position handed to him last year once he traded away Eduardo Escobar, and in return, Batty just could not find his game. He could not lift the ball whatsoever. His defense at the hot corner was at absolute best average. He definitely had some struggles throughout the year, to say the least, and really just lost himself mentally. And he was public about it too. He made it known that he went through a lot of hurdles and struggles, really trying to ground himself at the major league level, which isn't uncommon. We know a lot of guys that go through their fair share of struggles, even if they were top draft picks, for example, which Batty was. And even if Batty was the most polished guy, at least that's what they deemed him among the other Mets prospects at the time, it doesn't change the fact that projection versus reality might not be the same things. And Batty, of course, has plenty proving to do this season. And now we have Mark Vientos, is not someone who I have the utmost love or appreciation for as a third baseman. I really think he's going to continue to profile best at DH, just knowing how he profiles, what we've seen defensively of him thus far. I love the work he's been putting in with Francisco Lindor too, heading into early spring training. It's been great. And Vientos has the power like Batty, but also has it at the MLB level. And something that Vientos has been able to do is he is able to catch up to high heat. He is able to catch up to MLB's fastball nowadays, which is not an easy thing in the case of Brett Batty, who Brett just could not hit a lick on so many pitches, I felt like, last year. So heading into this spring, both of them are working awfully hard and diligent with Lindor, with the Mets' new third base coach, and everyone else involved. So what is your biggest takeaway from the early goings of both Batty and Vientos? And two, what is your big expectations for them this spring training?
Yeah, these are two guys that don't even have 300 bats in their, in their repertoire just yet. So we have not seen enough of them. You mentioned Batty going through, the mental issues with coming up. And I think that stems all the way back to last spring training when he completely was raking and they decided to go with Eduardo Escobar instead, who was
right
in spring training was struggling. So, and I think he missed half of spring training for the WBC.
Yes.
So, that kind of messed up Brett Batty, I think, from the start, not bringing him up from the start. He should have been the starting third baseman and Eduardo Escobar on the bench. And then there was the whole issue with Escobar, getting, benched, and then he comes up, but then he doesn't hit well. And it just it was a whole event for Batty to go through for an entire year. And Vientos never really got an opportunity to hit until later on in the season. And we saw with a little bit of consistency, a little bit of consistent at bats that, he has the power and he can hit. So I think this is the perfect time with a guy like David Stearns, who wants to evaluate the kids and see what they can do, that this is their opportunity. And this might be their only opportunity to do something like this, because, next year, Alex Bregman's available. And I wouldn't be shocked if the Mets, pivot to him at third base, while they're trying to get other guys. So you never know, but hopefully Batty and Vientos can pan out. I'm not going to make so much of the way they swing during spring training or the way they're drilling, because once you get into game time, it's a whole different story. And we saw it today. There's a whole bunch of clips from the catchers, right? Throwing to second base. I'm like, man, they're nailing every single play. And I'm thinking to myself, wait a minute, there's no pressure situations. It's not game time. But every throw was perfect from Alvarez to Narvaez and even Tomas Nido. They were all great today. But you can only put so much stock into that until we get to see them start playing games, which happens to be this Saturday. So let's see how they turn out over the next couple of weeks and see where they're at. I don't know how much third base Vientos is going to play. I know he's been practicing a lot. Like you said, he's done a lot of practice, going even to Lindor's, wherever Lindor was living at the time, or just practicing with him on a field. We saw a lot of that. We saw a lot of Batty working out on his own. We'll see where these kids end up. My thought is that it's probably going to be Batty's job to lose, and like you said, Vientos as that kind of DH that we'll see.
And while I agree with that, I think that's ultimately going to be the best way for this team to have success with its current makeup. Will Salmon came out recently, right before we went live, with a nice article on breaking down the latest what we're hearing with Vientos and Batty, and he kind of reaffirmed how we're continuing to hear how there's a rightful argument. If you're going to have Vientos as a lock for your DH, what you're losing is the potential development of that defense for a player that still has yet to really get his MLB career fully started. He's only had a little taste from last year or so, right? So it's a fair argument, because yes, you don't want to stunt a young player's growth and their development when they have plenty more growing to do. But the counter is, with this current makeup, knowing that Brett Baty has been deemed as like the guy for us as well, there's just a lot of reasons and understanding to say, hey, this is something that the Mets should do, where Vientos gets more consistent reps at DH because we know the power is certainly there. We just got to find consistency in it. And Baty, we know that he is the superior defender currently. Maybe not a drastic amount because, again, Baty is not even a league average defender right now. He needs to work on his defense quite a bit still. But, you know, if you look at the two, the athleticism, I like the idea of Brett Baty in the hot corner far more than I do Vientos as things currently stand. And if this is one of those things where the Mets are going to give them both continued playing time at third base, so be it. I just hope that it doesn't come at the potential risk of still hurting their respective developments. Because if you're going to give them both playing time at third base, say Brett's today, Mark's tomorrow, Brett's the following day, like say they keep flip-flopping, the only risk you have is, again, you're not giving these guys daily, everyday reps when you're trying to figure out if either of them could be, you know, your guy to be your everyday player. But from the trade value standpoint as well, that's where I think it does make a level of sense, especially in the case of Mark Vientos, by still trying to see what you have in him defensively for the sake of his potential market value by the deadline. If you're in a scenario where you do end up wanting to trade him, I'm not saying the Mets should or anything like that. I'm just saying that these scenarios are, of course, situations that Stearns and others will certainly be weighing the trade value of said players. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. I will say this, too, early goings, I like what I'm seeing from Brett Baty. That's for sure. Brett's swing looks a little bit shorter. I like it. You saw he's finally able to lift the ball a little bit, albeit it was, spring training BP, but it's still better than nothing. Marky V, of course, is lifting the ball. He went oppo on Jake Diekman today, one of the newer Mets reliever pickups, who I'm interested to see what he's going to do for the Mets this year, and the Diekmeister himself. But Vientos, the power is always there. So I guess now a question for you, and this can be wrapping up our Batty and Vientos discussion, and the same applies to everyone watching the live show and people on replay. Also, make sure to smash that like and subscribe button. If you guys have been enjoying the live show, it is greatly appreciated. Thank you guys all so much in advance for the endless support. I want to know everyone's opinions between Mark Vientos and Brett Baty. Which player do you think is going to have the better offensive season this year? What's your pick?
Oh man, I want to say Mark Vientos.
Okay,
I want to say,
just so you know, Ant, your audio did cut out, unfortunately. Are you okay if we do the headphone thing?
Sure,
awesome.
Sure.
Just give me 1 second.
Yeah. You can hear me okay?
Yep, we're good.
Okay,
apologies
perfect.
for the hiccup, everybody. Oh my goodness. Troubleshoot galore today. I want to try to stream on both platforms. I think it froze on Twitter. It is what it is. Regardless, Anthony, I didn't hear your reply. Brett Baty or Mark Vientos? Who do you think is going to have the better offensive season?
I want to say Mark Vientos. I think that he can really deliver if he gets the at-bats. And that's the problem. Is he going to get the at-bats? Because he needs to, if he's going to be a DH, he's going to obviously DH against lefties, but he also needs to show that he could bat against righties. Because if not, it's going to be DJ Stewart, or if they go with G-Man Choi, it's going to be him. Because, when you have a guy like a JD Martinez, he is your DH, no one else.
Right.
When you have a Mark Vientos and do this split thing, he's not going to get as many as bats as he can. So, I want to say Mark Vientos, but if Brett Baty can get out of his own way, get the mental jitters out of his way and be that guy, it's probably going to be him because he's going to get the most at bats.
Right.
But is it going to be power, or is it going to be kind of more of a Jeff McNeil type of guy where he's getting singles and doubles? That's the thing. If I'm thinking of power, I'm thinking more Mark Vientos, more average and, in the gap type hitter, it would be Brett Baty. But it's really tough because we just haven't seen it from either of these guys. And it's just because they haven't had the at-bats yet.
Right, and the at-bats that they've had, it's either been sporadic in the case of Vientos, where he isn't playing every day, or Batty, he was playing every day, but again, he just completely lost the command of the strike zone. Like, so bad that Daniel Vogelbach levels of just fastball right down the pipe, and you're like, what are we doing here? But if you're asking for my opinion, hopefully, if both these guys get a good sample size of production this year, I'm going to stick with my man Brett Batty, because he was a guy that I was unbelievably hyped for last year, and I don't want to just push him aside now just because of how last season went. He's still young. He worked on his swing a little bit this spring. He worked very hard all offseason long. I'm very excited for him. And for both of these guys, again, this year can very well make or break potentially their impact and their stay in the organization because of, in part, potentially Alex Bregman, as you mentioned, because it is most certainly a fair counter and argument for a Mets team that's going to be buying big this offseason with a lot of money coming off the books, and Bregman leading the charge far and away as the best third baseman made available in the free agent class, as I discussed in the Bleacher Report earlier today, breaking down the top 10 free agents for next offseason's class. Appreciate the plug earlier, by the way, Anthony. You brought up before even I did. So, guys, make sure to check that out. Yeah. If you go on the Bleacher Report app and then you search MLB rumors and you look, you'll see they already clipped me talking about Roki Sasaki, if he's going to be made available next year, along with the full version of that stream. It was around a half hour long or so. So thank you guys for checking that out. Appreciate it. But now let's get into breaking down. We talk about Batty and Vientos again. Uncertainty, but I'm excited to see what these guys have in store for us this spring as they battle things out. Now let's talk about a guy who, again, has been talked about quite a bit over the past couple weeks, especially over the past couple of days since he arrived in spring training. Being asked by Mike Puma right after his first BP, hey, what's your thoughts about potentially being traded at the deadline? It's a beat saying, I don't even know how to respond to that right now. I literally just stepped in here. It's been like 5 minutes. Pete Alonzo, where do things stand? Well, we've heard from Pete's side, obviously, that there hasn't been any extension talks this offseason with David Stearns. The only talks that they had is they listened. It was during the one-year contract negotiation that they've just been listening. A couple things stood out to me. One, Pete Alonzo does not have a hard line in the sand the way that Francisco Lindor does, meaning that he can extend at some point throughout the year if talks do pick up and the Mets approach him. Keyword, Mets approaching him there, because that's the big thing. It's not going to be Pete first. Same thing with Brandon Nimmo. Brandon Nimmo a year ago said the exact same thing. I would love to be a Met. I thought about myself as a Met for the entirety of my career, but, I obviously can't predict the future, and we'll see, once they approach me, what happens, because this is for the Mets to approach him, not the other way around, especially a guy that very well, market-wise, could be pushing for north of a 10-year, $300 million contract in the open market. Again, whether you want it to be that way or not, it's just a reality that we may find ourselves in with Pete Alonzo. So it seems like Pete has an interest level for sure to stay here. And knowing that he doesn't have that hard deadline for opening day the way that Lindor did, and Lindor was justified as someone who, of course, didn't even play a game in the organization yet, and now you want him to commit here for pretty much the remainder of his career, I understood that from Lindor's case. But for Pete's case here, he's all open arms. He's open for business, and for this to be a Scott Boras client that's still being this open, it tells you that the Mets can reach on a number with Alonzo that he will be here. I don't think an extension is going to happen at all during the season at this current rate. Do you feel different, or do you feel the same?
I was always holding out that little sliver of hope that he would sign an extension before opening day, but it just seems more and more like it's not happening. And at the rate that Scott Boras, the Scott Boras 5, as they're called right now, that haven't signed yet,
right?
It could go very long time before Pete Alonzo signed, into spring training next year. The hope is that the Mets do re-sign him. But, I think they're going to go at this with the intentions that there are a lot of free agents available. Juan Soto is out there next offseason, and he's going to be the top free agent get. So it's a waiting period with Pete. The thing that I like the most what Pete has done is he's not put a hard line on, signing like at opening day. I'm not talking about this anymore. No, he's open to negotiations. He's open to hearing what they have to say. And I feel like Pete's always been a good, chill guy about that kind of stuff. They're going to have to work through Scott Boras to get something done. And it does tell me that he kind of really wants to be here. If he didn't want to be here and he wanted to just go to free agency, he would just, cut the tie and say, I won't do anything until next year. But he's not doing that. So we'll see what happens. Excuse me. we'll see what happens with Pete. And I don't know. I just hope that he's not bombarded with questions all season long about this. Let it play out. Let's see what happens. It's going to happen anyway. My hope is that it doesn't happen.
I'm actually beyond pissed off now that I'm thinking about it. Now that you said that, that's going to be so annoying. How many post games, especially if they're, say, on a losing skid, forget it. They're absolutely going to hammer it and be like, do you even want to be in the organization anymore? They lost back-to-back games. Like, they can ship you to Chicago. Like,
that Puma question wasn't even about being a free agent. Is, do you think you're going to be a part of a trade or something? It's like, how do you ask that right now? Like, how can you? And I wouldn't think of anything less from Mike Puma. He asks ridiculous questions like that all the time.
I will say this though, Mike at least did soften the blow, because I do believe he was the one who first tweeted at the end that Alonzo is open to talk, like, throughout the season.
He did, and I retweeted.
So
I'm the sucker at the end of the day.
We're all hypocrites. We're all complete hypocrites. It's fine. Again, no what with Mike, but yeah, Mike does ask some, like, just you're just sitting there and you're like, why? Like, is this for shock value? Is this in hopes that they're gonna react a different way? Because aside from that, I don't know what you're trying. Especially, Mike, you've been in the game for decades. Like, you know exactly what you're doing. He's written a book about the Mets. He's read a freaking book about the Mets. So the more you know. But this is a good question. And I'm gonna leave this to people in the live chat. We're gonna talk about this a lot this season, whether people like it or not. And I'm actually probably going to talk about it, as a matter of fact, this Thursday on the Bridge and Cap podcast, the same way that you just did. I saw you just did a spring training preview with the fellow Yankee creator. I'm doing a similar thing with my man Pat this Thursday, and we're going to bring up the discussion, Pete Alonso or Juan Soto. People are going to get tired of hearing this all year, for sure. It's going to be similar to the way that really the Mets have been linked to Soto in years past, but to a higher magnitude, especially him playing in New York. It's going to be a very prevalent and very reoccurring thing. So if you're the Mets heading into next offseason and you had to pick between Soto or Alonzo, if you had to pick, not talking about both, because people are like, but the Mets can sign both. Of course they can. Can and will are two different things. We have the money. Money ain't going to be the issue, in my opinion. It's going to be about desire and ultimately swaying enough to bring them both here, right? But if you had to pick one between Juan Soto and Pete Alonso, for all my viewers watching live on a replay, and for you, Anthony Rivera, who are you picking?
And at this moment in time,
at this moment in
today,
time, correct? Yes,
I'm still going with Pete Alonso.
Oh,
and it may be crazy.
That's crazy.
But he has the track record. I don't know what Juan Soto is going to do. I need to see what he's going to do at Yankee Stadium and see if he can handle it.
Okay.
He went to San Diego and he was good, but he wasn't what he was with Washington, and he didn't get along with the players in San Diego. So that's a little bit of concern. He's not a great outfielder.
No, he's not. He's horrendous, actually. He's not. He had one insanely good outs above average defensive season. Like his final year in DC or his second to final year in DC. That was the case. Aside from that, he's been brutal. But
the only thing that Soto has on Alonso right now is age. Right? If you're signing Alonso, right, he's 30 right now, and whatever that deal is will take him to 37, 38, 39, maybe 40. With Soto, he's what, 24, 25?
Soto's 25.
So if you get him for 10 to 12 years, he'll go to 36, 37. That's where the deal, is really good for Soto.
Right.
But for me right now, the homegrown guy, people could hate it on the chat. I don't know how they're feeling right now. They're probably like, "Wow, why did he pick him?" But I'm an Alonso guy through and through. I don't know. Just at right now, I need to see what Soto does this year with the Yankees, and then that may change. But if he's not the Soto he was in Washington or the Soto he was last year in San Diego, mind you, that team didn't even make the playoffs.
Right.
So, it doesn't guarantee anything. You could swap the two. You could swap Soto and Alonso, and we could have the same results that we had over the last couple of years, where there's no protection for Soto, and he's doing things himself. He's getting the, 30, 40 home runs and 120 RBIs, and the Mets have nothing to show for it. It could be the same exact thing. But so, the hope is that they get both. So
The hope is that they
right,
get both.
that's the hope.
The hope is that they get both. The worst scenario is that they don't land either, which was kind of the case this past offseason. Craig Counsell, Shohei Ohtani, Yoshinobu Yamamoto, all going in different directions than what, especially the more optimistic Mets fans were hoping for heading into the offseason. And Juan Soto, prior to us, officially hearing, they're not trading for anyone that is a rental that's going to be of significant value, especially where the Mets don't have the proper assets where they could even really compete with a team like the Yankees and the pitching that they had to provide. So yeah, I love the fact that you're sticking with Alonzo, because this makes for a good discussion, because I'm going with Soto every day of the week. So this is what's going to make for a nice little debate here. Pete Alonso, I absolutely love to death. Had a privilege of meeting him firsthand in person last year. Great human being. Cannot wish enough amazing things for him. And I truly hope that he's a Met for the remainder of his career. Having said that, I care about winning more than anything. And Juan Soto, every single year in his career, has been far and away the better player between himself and Pete Alonso when accounting for winning. So because of those reasons, and he's 25, and even if you sign him to, say, a 13-year contract, he will not even be 40 by the time it's up. He can be slotted in the DH position, which I'm sure he will for probably the entire second half of his career. Think like Shohei Ohtani, where it's like, how could you pay such high AV for a guy but that only plays DH outside pitcher? But it's like the guy's so good that it warrants it, that's justified because of how consistent that bat is going to be. I firmly believe Soto's going to be that. I think he's going to have a big year. I think he's going to pull the ball quite a bit. He was starting to spread it Oppo in his second year with San Diego. I think he's going to go back to a bit more of a pull hitter like he was in his first year in San Diego after being dealt there because of the short porch. But ultimately, this is a player where I'd love to have both of them. But in the scenario where it was one or the other, as much as I love Pete Alonso, and I truly do, I want to see a championship more than anything. I think Juan Soto gives the Mets the best chance between the two to actually do just that. So that's why I stand where I stand. But by all means, I'm not opposed to bringing Pete back at all. I want the Mets to bring Pete back. And further, if they don't, I will be beyond pissed off about it, especially if it was because they didn't get Juan Soto. Like, if you lose Pete Alonso next offseason and you don't even bring in Juan Soto, who is the premier bat available, what are you doing? Because outside of Christian Walker, it's an underwhelming class on the offensive end. It's top loaded, similar this year in that sense. Pitching is what's dominating it, right? And speaking of pitching now, Anthony, let's pivot now into any more moves this offseason. Do you think anything else could be had here? We've heard rumblings that maybe the Mets would consider a short-term deal with the starting pitcher, Blake Snell. That ain't happening. I think Snell actually still might be a New York Yankee if the Angels don't give him a contract he can't refuse. That's starting to concern me a little bit. I'm not going to lie. Just because I hate the Yanks. And I don't want to deal with Pat on my show Thursday, being as cocky as he usually is. Point, though, is that Jordan Montgomery, for example, is out there, doesn't have a qualifying offer attached. Boston, what are you waiting for? It feels like they're somehow fumbling this when he's living in the area now because of his girlfriend/wife. It's very bizarre what's going on there, but Monty's still out there. There's a couple other arms out there, or even potentially via trade. Could you still see the Mets making a move of significance for this rotation, or do you think that they're just about rounded out for the offseason?
I think they're rounded out for the offseason.
Okay.
I don't want to be the guy with the doom and gloom and despair on this, but I think they're done. All signs point to them being done. I mean, everyone's going to say, oh, they're still in on somebody because, we need to have rumors and sources and all that stuff. I think from David Stearns and what he said that this team is pretty much set. Obviously, he's going to say, well, we're still looking. Every team should be saying that with those 5 free agents still available. If I'm getting any of them, it's definitely Jordan Montgomery. If we could do a short-term type of deal, 1 to 2 years or something like that would be nice because, Kodai Senga is the ace, and obviously he's our ace right now, but, he doesn't profile as an ace currently because there's still have to do this 6-man rotation to get him up to par. They said that they were going to do it. The same thing that they did last year. If you can get a guy like Jordan Montgomery, he's not an ace, but to have him and make 6 guys there and then push that depth even farther back where you have Lucchesi and McGill and then Scott and all the kids, Vassell and Hamill, that's even better to do something like that. So if they could get him on a 1 to 2 year deal, that would be great. That's my move. But I do feel like this team feels done. And maybe they're waiting to see if, one of these guys gets hurt during spring, because you never know. It could happen. It's happened before in the past. So maybe they're waiting to see something happen to them. But as long as Jordan Montgomery's a free agent, I am keeping an eye on him as much as I can. Snell, like you said, I think that maybe those were the two teams that we talked about yesterday on that New York sports preview that I did with Yankees Morning Brew. That was it. It was like Angels, Yankees. Those are the two teams. And the Yankee fans want Snell to add to that rotation. So outside of the Angels giving a ridiculous deal, like I feel like that's coming at some point. I think he might become a Yankee. He wants to be a Yankee, it seems like, right? At the beginning of the offseason, he was talking about wanting to become a Yankee, and there was an offer out on the table, just wasn't enough, and there's now another offer. So I think at some point those two teams will meet. Obviously, we'll never hear the end of it because the Mets are not signing anybody. But my hope would be to get Jordan Montgomery in here if we could on a 1-2 or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be sick. Again, I'm not going to get my hopes up at all, but it's a worthy discussion just because of the fact that we're at this point in the offseason where spring training games are quite literally this weekend, which is very exciting that we're going to get into shortly. But prior to that, there's a lot of really good players still out there. Regardless of if they're the proper team fit or not, there's a lot of guys out there right now. JD Martinez, I think that ship has sailed. I think the further proof of that is because, I don't want to say, actually, I'm not even going to say that. That's not true. I'm not going to.
Luke Voigt.
Yeah. No,
that's why.
I can't even do that because that's not valid. I know that's not how David Stearns and the Mets are operating. That makes literally no sense. Just these are minor league options that very well might have zero impact on the Mets this year versus a bona fide bat that could be the reason why you make playoffs or not potentially. So they aren't the same. But aside from JD Martinez, Gio Urshela's out there. He's been linked to the Mets. Davin Solano, who profiles a little bit similar. Again, a high contact guy, has plenty of experience, can play all over the infield. The Mets haven't been reportedly connected to, but he's just been a name I thought about considering the Mets have been linked to Urshela, and Solano can help in similar regard depending on what you're calling upon him. I think there's potential here for the Mets to probably be done on the offensive end, but pitching wise is where I am curious, just because we know how much David loves his pitching, and if there are guys out there for the right price, then certainly they'll make something happen. I think the Mets have done truly a very nice job this offseason. Not the best job imaginable, but I think they've done a very nice job in really shoring up the holes of what the floor of this overall organization could be this season versus what it would have been if they didn't acquire nearly the depth that they did. If they had the quality of depth that they had last year heading into this season with the same type of, normal starting players, I think that they will be far worse set up overall when looking at the two because of the lack of depth. So, yeah, I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to seeing if the Mets are going to have any more moves to be happening. And if not, then what we're rolling with is what we got. Hopefully it's going to be a year where it's going to be a lot of trials and tribulations. You're going to get some wordy rants for sure. Hopefully you don't get, 5 in the first month of the season, but we'll soon find out. Outside of, Jordan Montgomery and anyone else, are there any other names or ideas that cross your mind? Because for me, I'm still thinking trade front. I think David Stearns has been active in the trade market this entire time. I just don't just think it. I know it. He said it every single time. He's been questioned about, or the Mets done making moves? No. And he's like, and when he even talked just a couple weeks ago at the Mets season ticket holder presser, he made it known that, he's been active in discussions for quite some time, trade talks. We're not just talking signings, we're talking like specifically trade talks. So that's the one area where I'm curious if we're going to see if David has any other tricks up his sleeve before the season is finally upon us.
If he's trading for someone, obviously I would assume that it's a starting pitcher.
Right, and you would hope that's a bona fide number 3, like 1, 2, or 3.
Yeah. I do like that you mentioned Gio Urshela and Solano. The longer these guys are still available, and the Mets get to evaluate some of these guys in spring, and if they feel like, let's say, like Batty and Vientos are not really doing well, and you sign a Gio Urshela to the perfect type of deal, that's something that might work. So the longer they're free agents, the more it favors the Mets. The concern with them staying free agents is when it comes to pitchers, because those guys, they have a schedule and a routine to get ready, and to have them ready by opening day. Like if you sign Jordan Montgomery 2 weeks into spring training games, this guy's got to catch up to speed with a month that he's missed. So that's the concern when it comes to the pitchers. But a Gio Urshela, or like you said, Solano, even JD Martinez, if somehow, some way, it falls to the Mets, which, like you said, probably not. And I agree with you. But like the hitters staying on free agency favors the Mets more than the pitchers right now.
Yes. No, I completely agree with you. And like I said, it's going to be an interesting one to evaluate as we get into the spring games, which officially begin this weekend. I can't believe it. I'm doing post-game shows in February. Here we go. Let's lock in. All right, big weekend, obviously. It starts with Tyler McGill. Big Drip is on the bump for the Mets this Saturday, taking on the St. Louis Cardinals. No, we don't know lineups or anything like that. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, there was one big takeaway I took from not only being in spring training in person last year, which I'll be again this year in March. Stay tuned, guys. We'll have a big announcement for that shortly. But my biggest takeaway is I'm not going to be going hard on much of anyone this spring. Not like little to none. And the reason why I say that is Tommy Pham was just such a prime example of to not buy into at all on what you're seeing from a veteran in spring training, especially. Obviously, it's different when guys are competing for spots, so I'd like to make that clear. If a guy clearly balls out better than the other, then I think that they're worthy of being in that position because, again, they won the battle, right? But in the case of just overall performance where you know the guy's going to be a lock on the roster and he's having a bad spring, unless we know that there's injuries to be concerned about, I couldn't give a rat's ass. Because Tommy Pham was swinging through every single breaking ball throughout spring training last season. He didn't hit a lick. He was one of the worst hitters out of the entire organization in spring training, and then went on to be one of the best and most consistent hitters for the Mets throughout the season up until he was dealt to Arizona. That's just one of endless examples we see every spring of guys that maybe have a slow spring, maybe don't look great, and, they just need to get their legs under them, and then they have their typical, very productive, normal 162 season. So any remarks you'd like to share on the spring training criticisms for us Mets fans?
You're telling me you're not ready for criticisms in the chat after your post game, after game one? Come on.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, no, like I totally agree with you. I don't care what the mainstays of the roster do during the spring training, the veterans. Once the games begin in the end of March and opening day starts, they'll be fine. I'm looking into like the battles, right? You got Vientos and you got Batty, the guys in the outfield. How is Starling Marte doing? He's probably one of the guys I'll be looking into to see how Starling Marte's doing. And how Nimmo and Bader are able to work together now that we know Nimmo's a left fielder and Bader's the center fielder that Carlos Mendoza talked about. And then you look at the bullpen. How are these guys in the bullpen? There's so many guys that Stearns has brought in here, so much depth. Who is going to make that roster? There's probably about like 2 or 3 spots available. We'll see who are those guys that make that portion of the roster, and then the bench. Those are the guys that's what you really look into during spring training is, who's going to be the people on the bench, who's going to be in the bullpen. There'll be probably a little more emphasis on the starters this year because it's it's basically Quintana and Senga and a whole bunch of new guys. Like, I'm interested in Severino and what he's going to do. He's a guy that I wanted at the start of the offseason. We even talked about it before he signed. We had you were on my podcast and talking about Severino. So he was a guy that I wanted from the start to be at the back end of the rotation. You got Sean Manayan, what he could bring to the table, and Adrian Hauser too. I think he's going to be a sleeper on this team in that rotation. He's going to anchor that rotation very well.
Adrian Hauser is going to be like, and I don't mean this as an insult to him, but the type of production you're going to get is going to be like that very kind of boring, good Carlos Carrasco. There's not going to be much flashiness to it or anything like that. He's on.
Give me Rick Reed.
Exactly.
Rick Reed.
You're going to get a guy that, again, lingers, 3.5, 4-year rate type, but can eat quality innings for you. And that's ultimately what this Mets team needs. And it's good to have multiple guys in the Hauser range versus having guys that have a little major league experience range or are complete wild cards where, Severino had a piss poor 2023, but that was also an anomaly of a season from what his career has been while he's still young. So you understand why the Mets made the move that they did. The same way why the Mets signed Shintaro Fujinami, who I'm really, really excited to watch this spring, just because, I only watched him up close in spurts last year. Of course, when he walked everyone and their mother against the Mets last season, and also, prior to him signing with the Oakland A's, I was watching plenty of his film in the MPB. Guy's an electric arm. I'm so pumped to see him with the Mets just to see if they can really fine-tune his command, his arsenal. I think there's so much untapped potential there with him. I truly, ceiling, you're looking at easily Edwin Diaz is a setup guy and can close games for you. Every now and then.
I remember you were very excited about Fujinami,
and I
even before he got
exactly,
here.
And I stand by that. That's like one of the few guys. Jake Diekman, I wasn't excited about at all. Now my viewpoint has changed quite a bit because I've had a better understanding of why is his walk rate as high as it's been, and ultimately what were the adjustments that he made in Tampa that he can hopefully transfer over here to Queens. Because when I broke it down with Trevor May just over the past 2 weeks, May said it beautifully. Just like, he gets over there to Tampa and they were really able to fine-tune his arsenal a bit. And bam, he goes from walking everyone and their mother to having, easily just a couple pitch inning. Bang, bang, boom, a couple outs and you're out of there. So, yeah, while there's a lot of question marks with this team, there's a lot of things to be looking forward to and excited to actually check out and hopefully see a lot of these guys blossom again. The big thing I'm looking for outside, the third base battle, seeing what the kids can provide this spring, is ultimately the bullpen. What is the makeup going to be? And how is this going to look for David Stearns? Because let's not overreact too much to early bullpen production or lack thereof. Because, again, how guys look in spring does not mean that's at all how they're going to look throughout the regular season. So just keep those things in mind as we do our post-game and pre-game shows that we'll be doing, because I know you guys are going to be chomping at the bit to, say how much of a bum Mark Vientos is for going to 0-4 yesterday. I'm like, dude, come on. It was like, what are we doing here? Please stop. But yeah, I think that's all I really got today. Next time we do a live show, I'm definitely going to be taking more of your guys' questions and comments. I appreciate all my live viewers, my great members. I see Kevin. I see Timothy. Hope you have a great time at spring training. See a lot of the OGs in here and new viewers, so make sure to smash a like and subscribe button if you're new. Make sure to check out my man, Anthony Rivera, at the Subway to Shape podcast. Is coming at you weekly on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast covering all things Mets like we do here on WardyNYM. And Anthony, final remarks for you before we get out of here. Regarding spring training and the games this weekend. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I'm just excited to see baseball again, man. It was funny. Last week, I was just excited to see these guys walk into the complex. Like, baseball's back, man. Gotta love it. I love baseball, and I'm just happy to see the Mets back. And, there's really no expectations going into this year, like in years past. 2022, there was a little bit of expectations with Buck being the new manager. 2023, there was definitely a lot of expectations signing Verlander. This year, it's kind of, calm, kind of quiet because of the moves that they made. And the only really thing that's being talked about is Alonzo's extension, and then now this Francisco Alvarez thing. And this team is going to be interesting, and I'm looking forward to their fight to try to stay relevant. They definitely have to play well, because you can't go into next offseason having a year like you had last year and expect to just throw money at players and expect them to sign, because that did not work for Yamamoto this year.
Right.
So play well. And the hope is that you can hold on to Alonzo, sign him in free agency, maybe sign Soto, or, vice versa, however you do it, and get some guys in here that want to improve this team. Because if this team doesn't show out, or at least improve and have a winning record, it's not going to be as fun as an offseason, because there's a lot of free agents and the Mets have a lot of money. This team has to show that they're going to take the next step.
They have to show that they're willing to take the next step, and worthy to actually, invest in too. I think that's another thing.
Yeah.
Like, look, we love Steve Cohen. We love the endless billings that he's got. He's a diehard fan, all these great things. But at the end of the day, he's a businessman. He didn't make the money that he's made to this point in his life without there being obviously a lot of factors that go into it. But ultimately, it's about being fairly smart with your decision making, right? And in the case of the Mets here, he is most certainly not a guy that's going to be investing the same way that you will with the stock market if there isn't proper things to invest in. If the organization doesn't look like it's proper, then he, of course, is going to adjust and and replan and work on that. It's been a lot of trials and tribulations early with Steve Cohen as owner, but if there's one thing that I have certainly appreciated, it's been his willingness to adapt, listen the entire time, and make the proper moves. He'll be cut through it when he needs to. He's a shark at the end of the day. He'll do what he needs to do if you really, if it's really called upon. But when looking at the changes in the front office and all these things, the one thing that is true is that David Stearns has been the guy from the start that Steve Cohen has been trying so hard to go out of his way to land since he first became owner. Now he finally has his guy, so now it's time for us to sit back. I'm not going to say relax because you're not going to relax, but sit back and hopefully enjoy what I'd imagine is going to be a roller coaster, but an eventful one here with the Mets in 2024.
Yeah, he's really, if you look at everything that has happened over the last couple of years and what has happened this offseason, he is the top free agent signing this year. That's it. I mean, Cohen wanted him. Finally, he's been able to talk to him. Finally was able to sign him, and that was the guy. That is the big free agent move this offseason for the Mets.
The two biggest moves this offseason were the hirings of David Stearns and Chris Gross, and I'll stand by that for sure. Anthony, thank you so much for coming on. As always, it's a pleasure. For those that don't know Anthony Rivera, again, make sure to check him out on Twitter at Subway to Shea. You can check him out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All things Mets talk is what you'll check out from Anthony. He does a great job doing collaborative work like I do, for example. You'll catch him on plenty of segments there, hanging out with Dexter Henry on SNY New York Post and what they got going for their little segment. And stay tuned because Anthony will, in fact, be on the channel far more frequent than he ever has been before this year. So be on the lookout. We'll have the official announcement for that and what that means in the near future. Until then, have a great rest of your night, day, evening, whenever you're watching this. That's Anthony Rivera. This is Tyler Ward. We're signing out.